Hello, viewers and listeners. I'm Suresh Shankar, founder and CEO of Crayon Data, an AI and big data startup. Delighted to welcome you back to the next episode of Slaves to the Algo. That's right, Slaves to the Algo. Slaves to the Algo is my attempt to demystify the age of the algorithm by having experts come and share their views on what exactly algorithms are doing in our personal and professional lives. Will it lead to utopia or dystopia? And today, I'm delighted to have a person that I consider an algonaut, someone who's been involved in algorithms for a very long time. I'm delighted to welcome Peng Ong. Peng is a technopreneur, an investor, and an all round leader in the field of technology in both the US and in Asia. He currently is the founder and managing partner of Mongsel Ventures. But Peng's claim to fame is that he's actually been an entrepreneur who has had multiple exits with Match.com, Interview Woven, and Incentuate. He basically also has a very interesting take. He calls himself an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs. I've known Peng for a long time, and I'm really delighted that he's joining us on the show. Welcome, Peng.
Thank you.
Peng, I think I always like to start by, while this is all about business in some way and how algorithms are changing, I like to start by asking people a very slightly more personal take on this, right? And I think you've been involved with this whole business of how do you create algorithms for a very long time. Um, my question to you is, if you had to look at two or three algorithms that really kind of changed the way you think about life or affected your life, either as a person or in your professional life, what would they be? What would they be instinctively come to your mind?
Um, I think the first one is what we've been calling the feed flow AI. When you go to something like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, there's something behind the scenes that shows you, just look at this next, look at this next, look at this next, right? What they do in those algorithms causes people to just sit there and look at the next thing, and the engagement increases either revenues or click-throughs on ads, which is revenues anyway. Okay. And the interesting part is that algorithm is syncing up with your brainstem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is going, yeah, look at this, look at this, look at this, and you're not even thinking about it. You're just going, okay, okay, okay. And I think that's a very interesting discovery that the Algo guys have made that really digs into fundamentals of the human brain and how we absorb things. And I think it can be used for bad, it can be used for good, or it can be used to make money. So I don't necessarily say it's all bad, because you can use that to increase your health, your focus on financial success, etc., right? Or your friends, focus on building relationships. But of course, it can be used to make money for the companies. So
So, but
that,
that's really fascinating. Do you think the algorithm people actually talked to the neuroscience people and did this, or did they stumble upon it?
I,
And the reason I'm asking you this is that you are a founder of Match.com, and Match was literally one of the first companies that actually used algorithms in terms of matching people to each other.
yeah,
And this is way back in what, the 90s, when
yeah,
even
90s.
the word algorithm wasn't a common thing. So, is this a combination of algorithm and neuroscience, or the algorithms guys just do the technology and then stumble upon this neuroscientific
Yeah,
discovery?
yeah. I mean, to be fair, this is not probably not one algorithm. It's a whole bunch of different algorithms put together by different groups, and I'm sure some groups have talked to neuroscientists. Some groups just run this on large numbers of people, and like hundreds of millions of people viewing every day, and they figure out what works, what doesn't. You can discover these things by understanding the underlying principles of how our brain works, or you can just statistically discover these algorithms through machine learning.
And when you did Match.com, what did you do? Did you, could you, again, like I said, it's a long time ago, but it's such a fascinating thing because almost the
Yeah,
foundational company in some ways behind this.
yeah. I'm sure there were other CTOs of Mesh.coms that came on and talked about this over the decades. But when we first started, it was very, very primitive. There were, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 parameters. like political leanings. Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? You like cats and dogs, or cats and or dogs, and some basic question: height, weight. We actually even took into account income, if you wanted to share that with us. Um, and we sort of just assume that people that are similar in ranges, height, weight, etc., would get along better. Very unsophisticated, but what I discovered about matching humans is that it's not that hard. Otherwise, there won't be so many of us, right? It's kind of obvious. uh,
True.
so yeah, if you take two random human beings, and you try to get them to match, maybe it won't work. But if you took 1,000 men and 1,000 women, and you try to match them, uh, the chances are you can shuffle them around until there's a lot of matches, right? So it wasn't. I don't think it wasn't. It was that hard a problem. So
No, but it's interesting that you say you started off with a few attributes and you did the matching on that basis. And yes, you said it primitive, but it wasn't primitive at that time. Basically, but now when you come forward and you look at people like, I mean, even Tinder is passe now, right? Bumble and people like that, the guys who are coming out. How exactly have these matching algorithms evolved to today when you look at them today compared to what they were doing? How much more sophisticated are they? What do they use? Could you shed some light for our listeners?
Um, to be honest, I haven't been following the dating business that much. But the ones I've seen, and you can imagine having founded Match.com, anyone doing a dating company ends up finding themselves
Okay, to you.
on my doorstep. But uh, it, a lot of it is just people having different spins on how the matchup happens, right? Some go on dinners, lunches, some is just an initial conversation online, etc. So it's not about the algo. It's about letting humans discover um, what works for them, right? So a lot of it is not about trying to get massive matches, but there is some level of efficiency in dating programs, which is why they're so successful. It's very simple. If you walk into a room with 100 people, and even if your ideal match is there, the chances are you might not even meet him or her and have a chance to talk to him or her, let alone get the first date, etc. Right? um, because it's 1 in 100. It's very difficult for you to find 1 in 100 when you have an hour or two at a party
Hmm.
and there's alcohol and friends all over the place. Um, but if you ask the computer, here are the 50 things I like and things I don't like, etc. You just take a whole bunch of data and you run it over that 100 people. The matches pop up just very very clearly, right?
Hmm.
And so when you go out on a date with this person, your long term matches are there. So it's just you have chemistry, right? So it gets relatively simple, right? Because if you have chemistry, then long term you don't have problems. Oh, I guess I should say this um, for dating. It's the opposites might attract, but it's the similarities that sustain. So if you're building long-term relationships, right, you need value systems, background, culture, belief systems that are very similar, right? Um, and you need to understand each other so the daily interactions are not full of friction. Right? So
So
that's
that's
long.
very interesting, Peng, because let me try and do this right. I mean, you talked about the algorithm actually doing the matching at scale, and then you talked about the chemistry. Does the algorithm trigger the chemistry, or the chemistry actually trigger the algorithm? And I
Yeah,
know it's both cause and effect. I know it's hard
yeah,
to do that,
it's
but you're a person with actual practical experience in this.
not that practical. I found my wife pretty early. So, The who knows, right? We just I don't think people have done enough work in this area to understand cause and effect. I do know, and I think this is an interesting area, that the mating rituals of human beings all around the world have changed because of online dating, and someone needs to go study that. I think it's
That's it.
very
That's very
interesting.
interesting. In what way? In what way?
Um, well, the experiments, the matchups happen a lot more, right,
Hmm.
than before. So behaviors and how people interact. Like I've read, I haven't observed this, but I read about how people would have like um, serial dating on the same day. So you have
Interesting.
like three meetings scheduled, 1 hour, second hour, third hour, and all you do is meet and assess, and then you say things very bluntly. Hey, look, I don't think this is gonna work, and most of the time you say that because
Interesting. But
um,
isn't that the way of, in India that it's called parental matchmaking, right? They take you to three different places and you do the same thing and somebody else
yeah,
does the assessment. Now an
I guess.
algorithm is doing it.
Yeah,
But
I guess
but
parents were
it's but
the original matchmakers.
yeah, absolutely. But it's very interesting, right? Because if you really look at what we're saying, the the human mind doesn't seem to your parents doing it or your society doing it to then one primitive algorithm, as you called it, but literally the start of this, to now more and more sophisticated algorithms. So it seems really that it's not that technology is changing human beings, it's so much as enabling through just
Our
looking at
behavior.
more and more data. It's not
Yeah,
really fundamentally changing anything.
yeah, I think you're right. I think, but it's changing social norms. It's changing what we can do with our brainstem.
Yeah, and
And
that's
I don't
probably a
know.
podcast by itself to talking to you about brainstems and how the reptilian mind of the human mind person works. But I want to go a little bit further into that. It's very interesting. You said you meet people and then you suddenly realize other things that maybe the algorithm knew didn't necessarily reveal, but you find other things because that's how a lot of these things happen. And mathematically speaking, whenever I try to talk to a client about the idea of precision and recall, and the fact that
Okay.
these two are fundamentally you can set the it's like if you increase one you reduce the other. Most people don't seem to understand that that there's either a rabbit hole of of precision and you say I've got to be right, or you open up the aperture and allow them to see new choices. And isn't this really the core of matching, finding that little balance between precision and recall mathematically? Or how many new things did I tell you was is how much do I make the algorithm trust you? I mean, you trust the algorithm.
Yeah. It's trust is an interesting word you choose to use. Uh, I've always said trust is an emotion. Systems help you build trust, but in the end, it's an emotion, right? Let's say blockchains. People say, uh, sorry, I'm going off in a different tangent, but as
Yes,
an example, blockchains uh, are what trust is about. Because if you have a blockchain, you know the transactions happen, so you can have trust in the system. But actually, people could say, and there's been situations where people go into the blockchain and edit stuff, right? So, so so long as you, as a human being or consumer, you go, no, I don't trust that system because I don't trust that guy or whatever, right? However pure the infrastructure underneath it doesn't matter, right? I still don't trust it. So, uh, your system on matching, if people trust it, there could be even placebo effects, right? So, who knows how our brain works uh, in reaction to the trust we have for certain things or the mistrust we have to other things, right? It's a very complicated system up here. So
absolutely.
I can't sit here and tell you, if you do this on the algo, you get the trust of people, and if you don't, you don't get the trust. Because the
Yeah,
marketing,
but
branding, all that matters.
I think I like the way you put it, that there's trust, which is a emotion, but the system works towards building the trust. And one of the things I'm taking away, even as an entrepreneur and building a product company that does this for a living, is that one I talk to my engineers, I talk to clients all the time, saying the way a system builds trust is you focus on precision, show enough stuff that the customer relates to and likes, because then they say, okay, this seems to know me, and you increase the aperture slowly over time to kind of focus on the
Yeah.
recall things that you take one step at a time and you go wider and wider as you discover that. And I'm sure these guys have figured it out, or the algorithms have figured it out. Which brings me to, I think, I mean, this is a fascinating discussion. I think the whole podcast could literally be about this. I don't know whether you read. You're a reader, clearly, Sam. I have don't know whether you read Clara, the latest book, which by Kazuo Ishiguro, and he talks
Right.
about how everybody's going to have a personal agent, and the personal agent really, I mean, it's like that movie Her, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that world is going to come? How far away?
We have it in some ways already. It's just that the agent, which is the mobile phone or the laptop, doesn't have a human interface, right? It's all different pieces. All you need to do is glue it together. You can schedule your meetings. You can schedule travels. You can buy things, all that stuff. But just by having a slightly more sophisticated human interface, and that's it. You already have that thing. Think about what we can do today from our mobile phone or from our computer, right? Um, uh, the capability is there, the interface is not there, right? You don't need a super self-aware AI, etc. You just need an AI that will go turn on the lights and boom, lights turn on. That's what you need, and we have all that capability now. It's just not properly integrated to one. Amazon is trying to do that. A lot of people don't
Yep.
like the privacy issues around that, but I have Alexa sitting outside. So it's going to get there sooner than we.
Um, and you feel, and probably I'm going to reserve this question about whether it's utopian or dystopian till the end. But moving on, Peng, I mean, I think you did Match.com, like I said, a pioneer in algorithms. You did work with Interwoven, which is very interesting because I think almost one of the first companies to use unstructured data in a big way. Now everybody talks about it, but
Yeah.
Interwoven was a content management company before there was one, and then a lot of stuff around unstructured data. You did Incentuate. But now, when I look at where you reached, and you're trying to, you're running your own startup in that, and how did the dots add up? I mean, no, like I said, you did Match, you did. How did your journey go from there to actually becoming a venture capitalist?
Yeah. So venture capitalist is a slightly different step, but if there's a theme I would run through all my companies, including Monksville, is what's the ridiculous state of the world I'm trying to fix? Right? How does my existence address the state of the world that I think is kind of silly or nuts? Right. So in the case of Match, Match's parent company was actually called Electric Classifieds. It wasn't just dating. Right? So it was, how do you find something to buy or sell online, right? Or transact online, as opposed to newspapers, right? Um, so the previously, if you wanted to find something, your fingers got ink on it, right? Because
Your finger
you're
doing the
looking
walking.
yeah, through the classified ads, and this made no sense at all. How many ads can you read per minute, right? Not that many, and you know exactly what you want. So why don't you get a computer to search for it? So our idea was to have all the classifieds of all the newspapers put themselves on us, right? Of course, there were all kinds of competitive concerns, etc. And newspapers were resistant to technification or digitalization so long until most of them went bankrupt, right? Uh, um, so that didn't quite happen, but Match did, right, out of that. So the ridiculous state of the world was, you know, human beings were using human brains and newspapers to find things, right?
Hmm.
No sense. Um, so Interwoven was about managing millions of parts that need to come together uh, based on maybe even thousands of knowledge workers need to
Hmm.
come together to form one website. Right? And it didn't make sense what was happening. People are running around all over the place, breaking things as they check things into the website, etc. And we provided the structure for people. right? And so on. I'm not sure if you want me to talk about
No, but I think I have discovered the algorithm to getting money from Mongsil. An entrepreneur needs
the
to rock up to you and say, "Here is the ridiculous state of the world I'm trying to solve,"
yeah,
and that triggers your brainstem.
yeah, it does. It does.
And but do you know? I mean, like you're doing investing. I'm sure you see thousands of. We've talked about this. You see thousands of people coming to you and saying, "Listen, I have a big idea." And I have two questions for you. One is, do you see the world of investing in venture capital itself changing? Are you using AI data to actually sift through all of this and say, I have heard of companies that are saying we can predict the next unicorn and all of that. And is the world of AI and data going to come to venture capital investing itself? And maybe I should just ask you that question before I go to the next one.
Yeah, I think ultimately, uh, what I love about this domain is we're all about innovation and throwing algorithms at the stuff we do as investors makes sense, right? What people are trying to do. If I talk about it from a technical point of view, one of the worries I have about that approach is the sample size is not big enough, might not be big enough. If you look at successful AI learning algorithms, they tend to work on millions or tens of millions of data points. There aren't that
Hmm.
many startups. So, uh, and the other problem is what you parameterize. Some learning systems is very easy. If you look at Go, it might not be a simple problem, but how you digitize that problem is pretty straightforward. You got 64 by 64 and black and white, and that's it, right? Think about the world of startups and what factors are involved. There's a market itself, and that's hugely complex. As an entrepreneur, and how do you parameterize a human being? Is it as simple as dating, or is it more complicated? Don't know, right? So you got to throw in all those parameters. Some parameters you can't even measure properly, right? Because they're in here or in here, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. We're we're tracking, I guess, psychographics from the perspective of human beings. So we're conscious about talking about this person's leadership skills, his EQ, all that stuff. We do have these conversations, but we're not clear how to digitize this so we can run an algorithm on it. So our
Hmm.
algorithm is use our human partners to do
To
this
make
work.
those assessments.
Yeah.
But do you think that world will come just like now trading? I mean, high speed trading is all essentially algorithmic, and most decisions, investment decisions in the stock market get made like that. Do you think
Yeah,
that world is going to come?
I, I think
I mean, Y Combinator is trying that, isn't it, in some way in the
yeah, it's
early
doing
startup
larger
phase?
numbers. Yeah, and then only a few succeed, so you can figure out. But even Y Combinator, I'm not sure they have large enough numbers to be very accurate. They could probably have some learnings. They have what 100 per batch and 3 batches a
Hmm.
year, so 300 a year. That's not a lot of numbers as far as machine learning goes, right?
Hmm.
I think it's going to be tough for a while. I think there needs to be some improvement in machine learning before that can happen because uh, I think there are new directions of research on how to use smaller sample sizes
Hmm.
create the correct learning. Like we actually don't learn on million pieces of data, right? We learn on dozens, and we could be wrong, right? But there's a lot of work trying to figure out those kinds of algorithms, and when those come about, then I think this is a more an endeavor more likely to succeed.
True, true. Peng, I think, have you seen the second part of the question? When
Mm.
you obviously invest in a lot of startups that do AI, data, and besides other things, are you seeing any new interesting startups? I mean, nothing confidential, anything that you're exciting new ways in which people are using data or algorithms in Southeast Asia, globally, anywhere else?
Yeah. So first of all, I think COVID has gotten people serious about doing something with their lives. For whatever reason, we're seeing a whole flood of new deals and very well thought through deals, very serious entrepreneurs, right? Who are busy trying to fund them. So I think that's a really good side effect of this pandemic. It's gotten people thinking about the meaning of their lives and what they're trying to achieve. So I'm just making that note because it's affected my life very directly because I'm very very busy these days because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many good deals coming out. That said, if I were to try and draw one interesting, albeit not all-consuming trend, but it's a trend that I've seen in some of the thinking entrepreneurs. We've talked about this. Is what I've been calling the movement or the transition from transactions to relationships. How you focus businesses uh, uh, on relationships instead of transactions.
Interesting.
It's like how human beings used to behave in kampongs and villages, where you know each other, and a transaction is just a side effect of trust and some needs, right? You go to the grocery store, you pick up a bunch of stuff, and then you realize you forgot your money at home. The guy there says, "No, don't worry, pay me next time." I mean that's a focus on relationships, not trust. So how do you use that kind of thinking for businesses? You think how fragile trust is, right? And it blows my mind how little even the biggest companies focus on it. Imagine, we were still young and I went out with your girlfriend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trust is gone forever, right? Just one single act and trust is gone, right? And yet when people build websites and they sell your data, and they allow people to spam you because they pay them, um, they don't realize the trust is just gone, right? And it'll sometimes next to impossible to get back. The problem in our world, um, specifically the tech world, is we've been looking at the entire world as transactions because
True.
we can do transactions well, right? We don't do relationships very well because we don't understand what that is, or at least we don't try to understand what those are technically, right? Um, and so we focus on cranking up transactions because they drive top line, right? Every textbook you read on any technical textbook, Ruby on Rails, you open it up, so here's how you improve your transaction rates, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so all the top most valuable companies in the world in technology are all driving transactions, right? Um, so how do the question we are asking, I probably shouldn't reveal the companies, but uh, one of the questions we're asking is long term, how do we, you know, um, ensure that the cost of acquisition is still a transactional view of life? How do we ensure the cost of acquisition doesn't go through the roof because somebody else is selling that to us, right? Google, Facebook, etc. And we figured if we can build really strong relationships with consumers in a particular domain, uh, let's say, uh, what you care about, your health, right? What if we just become a friend to you uh, on the health front, right? So anything health wise that happens to you, you go to this portal, you come to us and interact with us to figure out. If you think about it today, if you have a health issue, right, you don't end up going to a portal, right? You do some Googling and all that stuff. But in the end, you find your friend who's a doctor and you talk to that person and you find another one, you talk to them, right? And so why can't that be a machine, right? Why can't that thing that you trust?
No, I can see another area, which is recruitment, right? I mean, I still have people from 25, 30 years ago work with me who any job before they go, they call me.
This relation,
And
right?
I don't even know what they do, but they call me and say, I'm doing this and what do you think? And I'm like, dude, you're like 3 steps ahead of me. But that is that relationship of careers would be, I think, a great one
Yeah,
where people would be about relationships, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, definitely. Short, what we call high value, low transaction rates products are best for that kind of environment, because if it's low transaction rates, you can't really try to push the transactions too much, right? So you focus
But
on the,
Peng, I have a question for you. You're a VC.
yeah,
You have to give a return to your investors.
yeah.
What you're now telling me is that your philosophy is actually long term, and you're trying to look for companies that are actually trying to find a ridiculous state of being, of the world and solve that, which is generally a large problem. Two, you're saying you're looking for people who want to focus on relationships.
Mhm.
How is your algorithm resolving return versus this kind of long-term success?
Yeah, well,
Your VC algorithm.
yeah. If you look at why LPs invest in VCs, LPs are the limited partners that invest in VC funds. Um, they specifically do it with the perspective of uh, long higher returns based on illiquidity, meaning you can't take your money in and out, right? So the more we can get that, the more we're doing our jobs for our investors, right? The problem with the VC world is too easy to do technical trading now, right? You crank up the revenues, you sell it, you flip, and you get your 5x, and
True.
everyone's happy, right? It's too easy to do that now. But that's technical trading is based on certain ways the economy is going, right? And not always possible, right? And I think now is going to be, it's going to get tougher and tougher with this bubble, right? And the kind of valuations. So in general, Monkshill doesn't focus on technical trading. We focus on building core value long term. So that's in fact in sync. What I just told you is in sync with what we're trying to do. By the way, the interesting thing about this uh, setup is if you're going after again a healthcare example, right? People are sick. People need healthcare today, so you can do the transactional stuff. It's what you do alongside the transactional stuff that determines your scale. 5, 10 years from now. I think if you just look at your business very transactionally, everyone's doing transactions. How are you going to differentiate yourself long term? How are you going to
So
be significant?
that's very interesting. It's very interesting, and I don't know whether it's true, but I did read that an ancient or an older Chinese culture, in Chinese, you turned up to your doctor, to your shinsei, and you gave him a whatever the equivalent of $100 is, and that's it. And basically, he was paid to keep you healthy, so because he treated you for free through the year.
Yeah.
So that's the relationship, because then he's
MO.
like not giving you, no, not he's trying to give you not a transaction, right? Take the
Yeah.
medicine and go away. He's trying to keep you healthy, which is a relationship.
Yeah.
And but this is fascinating, and we can go on. And I have time for a couple more questions, Peng, before I let you go. And first is one of the things that we always talked about is your view of the world. The world is divided into companies built on bits and atoms, and I'm going to let you talk about it because you
Yeah.
describe it in a fascinating way.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have misunderstood this, including some of our own analysts. When I talk about bits over atoms, it is true that if you push bits to create value versus atoms to create value, it's much more capital efficient, right? A lot of the value creation I've seen, uh, even in very physical things like Ninja Van, for example, one of our portfolio companies is doing more than 1 million parcels delivered every day, right? So you can imagine the scale of this company. It's parcels. It's physical atoms, right? So what am I talking about? Why is creating value from bits so important? Well, Ninja Van, I think, is one of the most efficient um, uh, last mile logistics company. I was going to say in Southeast Asia, but maybe even in the world. I don't have any way to prove that. Uh, we've got a whole bunch of algonauts, using your word, uh, in the back room, optimizing the way they track goods, the way they sort goods, parcels coming into the warehouse, distribution points, and then how they move out. Right? and that's how they get the efficiency with a lot of these algorithms, and of course very efficient execution of the distribution
The atoms. So,
scheme.
would it be fair to say that you're saying that whether you live in the world, whether you're a company dealing with atoms or bits, unless you're using bits to actually make this whole thing dramatically efficient, you're not going to succeed? Is that
That's the point. That's the point.
right?
We have this concept of deatomization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
deatomization is not it. It doesn't mean make all your atoms disappear. It means minimize the number of atoms you use in a system, right? So
Nice.
let's say if you have a very efficient supply chain, right, and your warehouses are always empty versus full, right? So you de-atomize the stuff in the warehouse by pushing them up down the supply chain, right? You've effectively created a much more efficient warehouse supply chain system, right? That's just one example. It doesn't mean you just give up all your warehouses and all your goods, right? You're still pushing goods, but you're minimizing the number of goods. If you minimize the number of workers needed in the warehouses or in the distribution points, you're increasing productivity or increasing profits. So the idea
So,
is human beings, etc. You want to try and minimize the numbers required.
so I'm gonna have another podcast with you, Peng, and I'm gonna add a third word to this thing because I think when I've been reading about it, you'll see this book out here, somewhere, the genes, bits, and atoms, because I think the gene is fundamentally like the bit in some way. And
Yeah,
now a lot of the work seems to be about how we actually, whether it's the mRNA vaccine or people are trying to do the same thing to genes as
right.
they're trying to do to bits, right? Probably another topic. But I have to ask you, and I know that you're uh, probably have very strong views on this. I've left it for the last, but we can come back to this in another podcast. Your view about how AI will change the nature of work, not just in the next 2 to 3 years, but over the next 10 years. You believe that there's going to be some fundamental shifts, I know, in this
Yeah,
space.
yeah,
So, what are the biggest disruptions that are going to happen as a result of use of data and AI to
yeah.
jobs?
So I come at it from at this problem or this observation from two angles at least. One is my background is AI, right? I did some graduate work in AI, and I've got lots of friends in the domain throughout the world, and I look at what they do. That's number one. Number two, I spend time investing in companies that think about productivity. How do I get my agent, let's say an insurance broker's agent, to be 2 times, 3 times, 4 times more productive than the average agent outside, right? So this is a very standard way to approach human intensive kind of businesses, right? Where you need a salesperson or you need an agent like a recruiter, as you mentioned earlier, or a doctor. You know, how do you get that doctor, recruiter, sales agent to be multiple times more effective? Now, even
Hmm.
accountant, by the way, multiple times more effective than the normal, you know, human being. And this is where a lot of these services industry services is about half of GDP, right? We're not talking about agriculture,
Hmm.
manufacturing, mining, all that stuff. We're just talking about services, and it's about half the GDP. And you already see a lot of stuff happening that people don't necessarily say it's AI, but look at e-commerce, right? How much has it taken
It
over
is.
retail? You know, think about a job or a career as a salesperson in a department store, you know, and how that's being disrupted the last 20 years. So so I think the innovations are going to come quietly uh, on both fronts, right? The AIs are going to get better, and they're going to get more and more deployed by the service industry, right? Um, and what's going to happen is that there are going to be fewer and fewer jobs. My economic way of looking at this is um, AI will drive the productivity through the roof.
Hmm.
Productivity of almost anything we do in the services industry through the roof, right? Uh, which um, I don't know for sure this will be really, really the case, but I think it might drive the value of labor towards zero.
Down.
That's the case, right? So if you look at it from an economic perspective, and if that happens, it's a very fundamental shift in our economy. Uh, if you talk to any economists and you ask them what are the assumptions of capitalism, right? Well, one of the assumptions is that the value of labor is not zero,
True.
right?
True.
If it's zero, how does capitalism work, right? So I'm questioning the very given where we are going with technology. Uh, I'm questioning even, especially if we in the tech industry succeed, what happens to this world we live in? And it's
Yes.
a interesting thought experiment. Uh, I
No,
think
I'm gonna kind of hold you to this thought experiment. I'm actually gonna come back and do another podcast just on this one area, Peng, because I think it's such a fascinating thing. We're setting in motion this revolution. We're already in it, and we are almost driving it fast. And
and
I
it's
think
going to
it
get
raises some fundamental problems. It's just going to pick up, and it's not just about the value of labor going down. You're seeing it in economic disparity, and again, just to give my listeners a hint of that, you believe that this will actually cause more revolution faster than climate change will, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. If you look at the curves coming, if you look at the curves coming, the increase in tech is just exponential. You've seen it the last 10, 20 years, right? Uh, if someone had told you 20 years ago you'd be clicking on these small devices and ordering pizza and getting things sent to you from all over the world, and talking to people all over the world, they'll think you're nuts. Just 20 years ago. And now it's just everyday thing, right? And it's going to go even faster, right? You know how technology gets adopted is going to be exponential. Climate change, I think it might even be exponential. I don't know, but so far it's been linear, right? So we have time, and maybe if we can solve the what I guess I should just label it the economic singularity, right? Then the machines can solve the climate change problem.
that's a great thing to do. I mean, there is a possible dystopian future, but there's also a utopia that possibly awaits us.
Yeah.
Peng, I think I'm going to come back to you and possibly have another podcast just on this idea of the economic singularity, what AI will do. But thank you so much for being on show. To my viewers and listeners, Peng Ong, highly successful entrepreneur, among the earliest to create unicorns before the term existed, among the earliest of algonauts, a technology leader, a true visionary in the world of technology, and a venture capitalist. If you have a business that can solve a ridiculous state of the world or that is focused on relationships or transactions, you know whom to call. Thank you very much to my listeners for being on Slaves to the Algo. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. We release a new episode every Tuesday. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe. Stay safe in the age of COVID and stay relevant in the age of AI. See you all next week. And Peng, thank you once again for a fascinating discourse into the algorithmic world.
Thank you very much.